As a community, we build empathy, curiosity, joy, and connection when we share stories with you. Welcome to Storytellers Project, part of the USA Today Network.
I once had an imaginary friend named b.well. He was a cartoon duck, kind of like Donald Duck, but with brown feathers, and he wore a lot more tweed, more clothes in general. He used to write me postcards from Michigan to Chicago, and when he'd visit and I didn't get them, he'd tell me they got lost in the mail. I would spend hours drawing intricate pictures and my scribbles to make words. I had no idea how to write yet. When he came to visit, I told him mine got lost in the mail too. I had no idea how to write a postcard or to actually send one. I don't think I really understood the purpose of an imaginary friend. We weren't like Calvin and Hobbes. We couldn't have made an amazing comic strip. Pretty much he came to visit, and he would talk to me about any adventures he had. I'd tell him some stuff that was going on for me. My parents would once in a while ask me, when something was missing or broken, if b.well had done it. I thought this was really weird because I was pretty sure they didn't believe that I had this friend named b.well. And I was an only child, so if something was lost or missing, I was definitely the person to ask. They also didn't get, even though I told them a lot, b.well was an adult like them. b.well did not break that dish, hide it under the rug, trying to figure out what to do with it, forget about it, and then get it discovered later. That was me, absolutely. b.well stopped visiting probably when I got friends. And honestly, I like to think that he's in Michigan at some vineyard having a few glasses of wine while he's retired. I've never been to Michigan with the vineyards, but someday I hope that I am going to go there after a glass or two, and I'm going to see him. And he's going to be sitting bellied up to the bar. He obviously can't look like a cartoon duck then, because that would just be very odd. But I'm going to sit down, and we're going to start talking, and I'm going to all of a sudden realize it's him between the tweed and his laugh. I'll never be able to tell anyone that I met my imaginary friend when I'm an adult. No one would believe me. I used to play these intricate imagination games like most children do. I wasn't into Barbies, and I wasn't into playing like family or house. The whole idea of having kids and a husband in the traditional sense and taking them to school and changing diapers and baths, that just sounded like a lot of work, and I didn't really like that at all. Instead, my backyard was mapped out as a mystical land. There was this giant rock that at one point was much taller than me that I called Skull Rock. There was a triangle of a garden with a bird bath that was the Garden of Eden. There was a row of trees that divided my neighborhood's, my backyard to my neighbor's house. And that clearly was the border between fairy and the real world. Now, I mostly spent my time in this little triangle of a land that happened from the deck stairs. It was tiny. It's where the gypsies lived. I was always a gypsy. Sometimes I was a powerful witch gypsy, but most of the time I was a gypsy just trying to get by with my fake fire and reading people's palms. I convinced people to play this game with me, and I played it for hours, and I probably was one of the last people to play this game. One day, I saw some of my friends sitting behind the Garden of Eden, and they were talking. So my gypsy self, I snuck up on them, and they were talking about boys. They were talking about boys from our school in the Garden of Eden. You can't do that. So I confronted them, and I was like, why aren't you pretending? Now, they wanted to keep talking about the boys. They didn't even want to try to put it into our imagination game. I got a little angry. No, I got a lot angry. I started yelling and getting red, and I was the only one angry, so I looked ridiculous. And I started saying, "You have to use your imagination." They didn't really want to. And I kicked them out of my house, well, my whole backyard. I was like, "You don't use your imagination, you're out of here." So the next day, I had to see him at the bus stop, in school, at the cafeteria, back at the bus stop. Everywhere there was reality. Luckily, I found out about books. When you open a book, you get to imagine with that author, and they have done a wonderful job mapping out a world for you. I read R.L. Stine's Fear Street. I went to trashy romance historical novels, Anne Rice's Vampires and Witches in New Orleans, and then Charles DeLint had this wonderful made-up city in Canada that I loved visiting. This really helped me get through high school. Because the thing is, I got to be inducted my freshman year into the Dead Dads Club. Yep, membership is absolutely mandatory if you know your dad. And for that long 1 year of watching someone I loved die of cancer, I was even able to pretend my way out of that a bit. My dad was a strong, silent type. He traveled for work a lot. He wasn't that guy in the hospital bed in our TV room. He wasn't this guy that was talking to things that weren't there with hallucinations. He wasn't somebody crying because dead relatives were visiting him. And then he died, and my life forever changed, but the world didn't change at all. The phone would ring, and I would get to pretend sometimes that it just might be him on his travels. And so I'd pick it up. I was very good at pretending. It wasn't him, but it was telemarketers. And I loved those telemarketers. I got to tell them, "No, I'm sorry, he's not here. Maybe call next week, he's traveling right now." So anytime that I could feel at all a little bit sad about what was going on in my life, there was always a telemarketer that could cheer me up. Now, I knew my reality in high school. I didn't live in a fantasy land completely. I had a dead dad, and I lived with my mentally ill mother. I knew there was no way I was going to pretend my way out of this. And I did grow up to become a functioning adult with a job and a career and a husband and children. And then I had my midlife crisis. I was 35. I know, it sounds like I'm an overachiever, but it's not. It was 100% me underachieving because in this morbid way, when you have a parent that dies before they're 50, you just know that there's a time clock. It might not really be my time clock, but I was a little concerned it could be mine. And there were two major life changes going on. I had a husband and 3 wonderful children. I had a career I liked, and everything was going great. And then I was moving to Des Moines, and I was pregnant for the 4th time. Now, there was nothing about Des Moines itself. It was just I knew that I was moving away from all my friends, family, the career I had. I knew that there was no way I could be a junior high English teacher while taking care of 4 kids, while my husband is a little bit of a workaholic, without any sort of family support. I had no clue what I was going to do. That's not something I wanted to feel at 35. So I did a wonderful job pretending in front of my kids. This is going to be a great adventure. We're going to have so much fun. You are going to love it. And we do all love it. But let me tell you, at the time, I was so scared. So I said to my husband, you know, when you're pregnant and complaining a little, I was like, "I can't believe you're moving us somewhere without a children's museum." There was tons to complain about, but that was the biggest complaint I had. And he looked at me and he just said, "Maybe you should start one. That'd be a nice project for you." A nice project? A nice project is organizing a closet. It's upcycling a dresser. It is alphabetizing my spices. Starting a children's museum is not a nice project, but instead of the long, huge list of to-dos I had to do to get us moved here, I started imagining, what would I want in a children's museum? The seed had been planted. It wasn't until months later, after all the hard work had been done of packing and selling a house and buying a house and unpacking, registering my kids for school and camps and finding doctors, and oh yeah, having the fourth baby, that I woke up and I realized I was sad and I was lonely. Now, I'm an only child. I loved being an only child. I didn't know anything different. And when we had our first baby, I remember looking into her eyes and being like, oh, maybe she should be an only child. And my husband looked at me so sad and concerned. Why? She would be sad and lonely. So I found myself now in Des Moines with 4 kids, hardly any time to myself, and no friends. And that is when I found myself sad and lonely. So I woke up and I decided I need a friend. And that's when Bigo showed up. My imaginary friend. No, I needed a real friend. So I woke up and I decided today's the day. I am going to go to the scheduled play date. I am going to find one mom to come away from the group with me. I'm going to convince this one mom, any of them, okay, to be my friend by we'll go get some food. And then if I can isolate this mom from the group, I can have a friend. Even when I was thinking and planning this, it sounded like a serial killer or a stalker. It was the only thing getting me through that day so that I didn't just go and take the colicky baby and the toddler and sit in front of the TV and cry. So I get to the play date. It's at this historical train that has a lot of rust. I'm not sure why my 2-year-old is running around this historical train. I mean, I know I took her there, but I had made the deal. Today's the day. I start out calmly, like, oh, do you want some food? You want to get some food? By the end, I'm desperate. One mom agreed to get some food with me afterwards. Thank you, Laura. So we sat at this pizza place, and we had 5 kids with us under the age of 5, running around as we're trying to eat pizza. And we're talking, and one of her daughters has this imagination game that she keeps coming over and telling her mom how the superhero cat, is fighting this evil villain. And I watched this mom interact and have this imagination game with her daughter. And I was kind of annoyed. Why was this superhero cat, who's supposedly a super, interrupting adults talking all the time with these silly problems? All right. Imagination saved me throughout my life, and here I was annoyed at this kid having this special imagination game with their special adult. Now, one thing did come out of that conversation. Laura did mention, I wish Des Moines had a children's museum. Yeah, we're going to be friends. So I started imagining more. I'd be looking at things and being like, what could we use for this? Laura and I started gathering up treasures, and we started finding ways to be like, what can we make with this and what can we do with that? And our kids started getting to play in these places that we were mapping out, just like I had my backyard mapped out as a kid. I got into one small fight with my husband where I ended up saying something about you have to pretend or use your imagination when I tried to convince him to build me a boat. I had to explain, it doesn't need to be water-worthy. It's for pretend. And we did. We started a children's museum, and kids came, and they played, and it was awesome. Our kids then all of a sudden got to play the same types of intricate games of imagination in this place that we mapped out. And sometimes we'd be invited in, superhero cats need help sometimes. But other times we just got to imagine what else are we going to do. And we got to meet other adults who wanted to imagine. And we got to do more and more things. And then COVID hit. And it was tough because COVID was hard. And we closed down. But what we did instead was we got out all of our tools, the saws, oh gosh, this is me not knowing what they are, the table saws, everything possible. And we pulled it out into the museum floor, and we got to start imagining even more. We did farmers markets and farmhouses. We did a conveyor belt pizza oven powered by little dragon flames, supposedly heating the pizzas. It was delightful. And COVID was a miserable, horrible time, but it was also this time that imagination called me over like a Red Rover game, and I was like, yeah, I want to be a part of this. And I started writing for hours, and when I sat in any sort of a meeting, I started pretending, the backstories of people I saw. Anytime I'm even a moment bored, I know now I sit there and I write poetry and storylines, because not just to keep my boredom away, but the fact is, imagination is magic, and who doesn't need more magic in their life? Thank you.
In January of 1999, I was working in Puerto Rico near the southern coast. I was there with another worker from our station in Iowa, and I was working for My Kitchen Seeds. The days in Puerto Rico are very long. You start before dawn and you work until late in the afternoon. Then seed corn companies send people like me to Puerto Rico to continue the work we were doing in the summer during the winter. One day we decided to go to a nearby beach. Now, to be honest, I'm not a very good swimmer. I took lessons in middle school where my instructor's name was Mr. Lee. Once, he had to rescue me out of the deep end while I was doing a skills test. And while I flailed and gasped for air, he walked casually to the other end of the pool, grabbed a very long stick, or pole, I should say, with a hook on it, came back, plucked me out, and deposited me on the side of the pool. And there I was, exhausted and embarrassed. But he gave me some advice. He said, "Johnson," he said, "don't worry." He says, "Even after you drowned, the top of your head will bob to the surface of the water." Yeah, Teacher of the Year was that guy. The beach in Puerto Rico was very well used. The trash cans were full. There was graffiti on all the bathhouses. The beach itself was a narrow strip of sand, and the sand was very coarse, the kind of sand you would use if you were making concrete, not beach sand. So it was a rough place all the way around. But it was a great opportunity to wash off the day's dust, pollen, and sweat. I walked into the waves, and the water was warm, and I kept walking deeper into the water. What I didn't realize was that the bottom dropped off, just beyond where the waves broke on the shore. Well, when the water got up to my waist, I dove in. And I was swimming for a while with the water around my shoulders, and I was enjoying it. It felt great. But then I decided to swim towards shore. And when I did, the waves lifted me up and pushed me further away. I was caught in a riptide. Every time I tried to swim towards shore, the waves would pick me up and push me further out to sea. I was in water over my head. I was in water and treading water, and the water was splashing into my mouth as I was trying to stay afloat. And it was getting bad because my muscles were starting to burn from a long day in the field, and it's all that swimming. I didn't think I was going to make it. They say that when you think you're going to die, you think your life passes before your eyes. But for me, it was the things I was going to miss. I would miss my family, my kids, and my wife. And I've always been in control of my life, the successes and the failures. If I succeeded or if I failed, it was on me. And I could always recover from my failures. But this one was different, and it was lethal. I was stuck in a riptide, and I couldn't get out. So I did something I never, ever do. I spit out the water, and I screamed for help. But there was no Mr. Lee with a long pole in Puerto Rico. But there was Mitch Barlow. Mitch Barlow came from another station in Iowa to Puerto Rico, and he had come to the beach with us that day. And the best description of Mitch is that he's a block of a man. And waves have a tough time moving Mitch anywhere. And so as he waded out into the water, he grabbed my arm, and he pulled me in and deposited me on the sand, and there I was, an exhausted heap. He had saved my life. But again, there I was, exhausted, gasping for air and embarrassed next to a body of water, just like 8th grade. But after I nearly drowned in the Caribbean Sea, I kept asking myself the same question. What was I doing with my life? What was I doing with my life? I thought about my grandfather, Keith Monroe Lyons. Pop is what we called him. And the best description of Pop was he was 5 foot nothing. And my dad used to joke that he'd have to stuff handkerchiefs in his back pockets to keep his pants from falling down. But he was a legend in our family. He was a man who was generous and grateful at all times, even when most of us in his shoes would have been resentful and bitter from all his life experiences. As a kid, Pop was my hero, and he still is to this day, and I had promised to be like him, but I had forgotten my promise. But with my second chance at life, I promised to keep his legacy alive by doing a mission, and a mission that became an obsession, and the obsession became big part of me. My mission was fairly simple. I just wanted to feed the world. And as an agronomist, that's the tagline. That's how they get you in the door. They say, agronomy feeds the world. And you go, oh, great. But it's not quite that simple, because even hundreds of years ago, a guy by the name of Malthus came up with this postulate. He postulated that the rate of growth of population of people, agriculture couldn't keep up. Agriculture needs to find better plants and better ways of growing them. And that was going to be my energy that I would go forward with. I would do agricultural research with the hope of keeping even with that population growth. So, in 1995, I came back to the Midwest from New York State to continue my education at Iowa State. 2 years later, I was working in corn research, doing corn breeding. And 2 years after that, I had my wake-up call in Puerto Rico. But I couldn't pursue my obsession because I had a family to raise, and I had to work, and family always, always comes first. The seed industry was going through its own upheaval. Chemical companies with large checkbooks were buying seed companies, and they were combining companies, and they were laying people off, so jobs for guys like me were getting hard to come by. But my obsession was like smoke from a fire that never goes out, so it was always around. In 2005, after a series of jobs that were neither satisfying or secure, I got a job with DuPont Pioneer. It paid well, and it had some of the best researchers around. They had nearly 40% of the market share for seed corn sales, which meant they were doing really well. And it was the dawn of transgenes, GMOs, and I was going to work in regulatory science, so I had a very secure job. So I also took a step back, and I decided to rather the whole world, I would concentrate on the state of Iowa and people who are hungry in Iowa. So I started volunteering at the Food Bank of Iowa. And I started a small vineyard in Redfield with the help of friends and family. We planted 600 vines in one acre, and 10% of the harvest would go to the food bank along with $100. The best year we ever had was 2 tons, but every fall there was a check going from the vineyard to the food bank. But that wasn't enough. That was just giving when giving was convenient. I call it armchair philanthropy. I could do more. So at work, I discovered that if you make giving fun and easy, people can be very generous. So I started something called Toast and Jelly Mornings. And if you can imagine the aroma of toast wafting over cubicle walls, that got people to stand up and go into the break room where they had breads to toast and jellies to try, and they really were generous after that. I came up with Pi Day, March 14th, which is a play on the value of pi 314 and the symbol. And science people love that kind of stuff. They just love it. We had tailgating parties for the Iowa State game. We had chili cook-offs. We had Halloween parties, anything for a food drive. I was finally finding my rhythm. I was finally starting to make a difference. Then something else happened when I was a pioneer, the arrival of Timothy James Riley, my grandson. So I started focusing on the needs of children, and I got involved with the Backpack Buddies program at the food bank. And Backpack Buddies send food home on Fridays so kids have food to eat over the weekend. And I made a promise that my grandkids would never go hungry. And I made another promise that I would work hard that no kid went hungry. In 2016, I was laid off by Pioneer. But I spent 4 years working for a startup called Power Pollen, and I volunteered on my own time at the food bank and at Meals from the Heartland. And then, after 30 years of doing agricultural work, I decided I had enough, and I retired. But there is one moment in my career that will never leave me. I was in Mexico doing work for the company, and I was driving past a field of wheat that had just been harvested. And standing in that field were families, kids included, and they were sifting through the chaff that comes out of the back end of a combine. They were looking for wheat kernels. That was the greatest demonstration of the desperation of hunger I had ever seen in my life. They had one purpose. That purpose was to feed themselves and their families. Now, the companies I've worked for, they have several purposes, but feeding people is behind making money for their stockholders while selling something that should be a human right, which is food. And that's not my idea. That's Norman Borlaug. So now I am retired for good. I grow zinnias and marigolds and no corn. On Mondays, I do food rescues where I go and pick up food that might have otherwise been just tossed out and take it to places where people eat. On Tuesdays, I go volunteer at the food bank with a group of very determined retirees. Don't get in front of those gray-haired people. On Wednesdays, I get to go to the schools and drop off the cases of Backpack Buddy sacks. And then I go to the DMARC pantry and help out on Army Post Road. Thursdays, I often go to Meals from the Heartland and do packmaster duties. And on Fridays, that's the best day. I get to play with my grandson, Griffin, and boy, do we raise hell. Now, my obsession is alive and well, and it is fed by facts, not just my emotion. The fact that food insecurity is a product of poverty. The fact that the Food Bank of Iowa and its partners over 55 counties have set records month after month after month of the number of people that they assist and families that they assist. That 10% of Iowans are food insecure. And that blows my mind because we have more pigs than we do people in this state. and a third of the people who are food insecure are kids. Now, not every obsession is like a Calvin Klein commercial. You know what I mean. My obsession is more like those horrible moments in Puerto Rico when I was pushing against a relentless force, which is food insecurity. But now there is no Mr. Lee. There is no Mitch Barlow to the rescue. It's just me doing my very best to get food to the next person who needs it. Thank you.
Great job. can't see you guys. This is good. I was about 4 years old when I went to my first wrestling practice. It was held at one of the local high schools near where we grew up. And I remember walking into the room, and I saw all the older kids running in laps to warm up. And I also saw my cousin, and he was like sprinting around all these guys. And everything I knew about the sport of wrestling in that moment was just watching my cousin with a cheesy smile on his face. And I'm sitting there thinking, dude, I am way faster than that. Like, how hard could this sport really be? I ended up wrestling for about 14 years, and I didn't know it at the time how much of an impact and influence that the sport would have on my life. This is planned. See, wrestling was the sport that I did that a lot of my friends did not. I grew up playing soccer, a little bit of baseball, a little bit of football in middle school as well, but as you can see, not a very big human. So wrestling appealed to those of us on the small side. I had a pretty fun career. Went to some tournaments and triumphed, went to some other tournaments and got my butt kicked. But the thing about wrestling is that it teaches a lot of larger life lessons that really, a lot of larger life lessons that really, a lot of larger life lessons that you carry with you for the rest of your life. See, it's a sport that you have to put in the work actively if you want to be good at it. You have to go to practice every day because nobody knows how to just walk out on the mat and, run a head outside single and run a bar arm and pin somebody. You have to go to practice and work on that. You have to actively put in the work to get better. You have to be disciplined, and you have to train for this in your lifestyle. You have to eat right. You have to pay attention to your diet. You have to get right. You have to get sleep. You have to sleep better. There's a lot of things that go into becoming a really good wrestler. The other lessons that it teaches are larger than life lessons that I think a lot of us carry with us if we were actively growing up in sports or as athletes. And the biggest one of all is that, you can't hide when you're out there. You have to go out there and compete, and wrestling specifically is just you and that other person out there on the mat. You're trying to push them and pull them, literally bend them against their will, all while they're trying to do the same thing to you. A lot of it is, there's a lot of steps and motions involved, and, you got to learn how to attack and defend, all while they're trying to come after you, and all while you're trying to go after them. It's quite literally, a calculus equation in motion. Biggest lesson of all, you got to learn to earn your wins and accept your defeats, and I had my share of both. I remember in 6th grade, I made the state finals. Pretty big deal, right? Well, I lost. And I remember walking off the mat, and a coach threw his arm around me, and he was just like, dude, don't worry about it. In 10 years, nobody's going to remember a thing. And he was totally right. It definitely doesn't bother me that I tried to go lock upper body with this guy, got inside trip, taken my back, and pinned while I was winning the match. But then I also remember, senior night in high school. Senior night's a really fun night because you get a chance to really celebrate, not just your entire athletic career, but also, what you meant to your community and growing up and going to the high school that you attended. And, we did that senior night thing where we walk out and our coaches, talk about all those great things about us. Cody is a 4-year letter winner, blah, blah, blah. And he will be attending the University of Iowa. What he didn't say was that I would not be wrestling at the University of Iowa, probably on purpose. And when I tell you guys that I saw the fear of God in that kid's eyes that night, easiest pin I think I've ever had. My competitive career ended not too long after that. And to be honest, I wasn't all that upset to be leaving it all behind. Because in that moment, I really hated wrestling. See, we went to a high school that was pretty well known for wrestling in the Kansas City area. We were that school that it was a tradition, it was a badge of honor to be a Park Hill wrestler. We had lofty expectations, big, intimidating expectations that kind of rippled through the community. And it was something to live up to and to aspire to be. And those expectations crushed me. See, the school that we went to, it was one of those schools that a lot of kids transferred into, right? I'm sure you guys know the type. Everybody loves to be a part of a winner. And we were winners. And I'm sure at the time that our coaches cultivated our program that way to, increase everybody's overall skill level, right? The rising tide lifts all boats. I took all these kids moving in and joining our program, and while we won a lot of big matches and it led to a lot of memorable performances and banners and all that good stuff, I took that as an indirect message from the coaching staff that, hey man, you're not good enough. And that bothered me for a really long time. I would go to practice every day, and it just so happened that all the best kids on our team at the time were at or around my weight. So practice was more about trying to survive and trying to just get through it, rather than trying to go in with a purpose and trying to improve and get better. I didn't really see it that way. I kind of turtled up, I curled up, and I just kind of stewed. I got really mad. I didn't latch on to my teammates and seek advice. I didn't go to my coaches and seek guidance. I just kind of showed up every day, walked the halls, mad as hell, and I never really figured out why. But wrestling was no longer fun. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, I realize now that I just wasn't mentally tough enough to understand or grasp that situation. I wasn't mature enough to navigate it in a way that probably would have benefited me at that point in time. But to be honest, if I were to go back and get a second chance, I'm not sure that I would change anything. See, around my sophomore year, I started thinking pretty big about my future. And I'm sure we've all seen those commercials, right? We all are going to go pro in something other than sports. Well, I just really liked sports. That was just my thing. That's what I wanted to do. Maybe not be an athlete, but just be around the games in some form or fashion. See, I have this theory that kids grow up and they're watching Nickelodeon, and then they go to Cartoon Network, and then they go to Disney Channel, then they go to MTV and VH1 and whatever other trash TV is going on out there. I went straight from SpongeBob to SportsCenter. Bedtime was after the top 10 plays, and I would just stay up late and watch Scott Van Pelt and Stuart Scott and think, man, those guys have all the fun. So that really piqued my interest. So, sophomore year, I took an entry-level media course and learned about the world of sports journalism and broadcasting, and just so happened at the same time to take an advanced-level English class, and that teacher kicked me in the butt. And that really kind of pushed me to take more writing classes and to, I started writing for the school newspaper, and we were fortunate enough to have a broadcast program, and just kind of really dive into that world. And all of that pushed me to go to the University of Iowa, which is obviously a world-class school for English, right? And the first thing that I learned when I got to Iowa City was to write every day. And so I did. I went to the student newspaper, the excellent, excellent student newspaper, the Daily Iowan, and I wrote literally every single day. But the first thing I learned was that a lot of the traits that have pushed me in my writing and journalism career are actually a lot of the same traits that I learned as a wrestler. See, I learned how to redo something and be very patient about redoing those things as a wrestler long before I became any good at writing. You got to be able to envision something that you haven't yet created, and there's usually a lot of preparation involved. You have to take something that looks completely natural and feels completely instinctual, but we all know it's not. Think about wrestling, right? Head outside single, no change off to a double, blast double, run your feet, keep running your feet. Well, he broke your grip. Now you got head, hands, defense, stand up, right? Movements create shots, create action, creates points. In the same way that words create sentences, create paragraphs, create stories, right? You write, you edit, you rewrite, you re-edit. Let's make this a semicolon. No, let's make it a comma. No, let's make it a dash. Hang on. Just turn it back to a semicolon. And in the end, you gotta be able to envision that thing that you haven't yet created. And you got to be able to earn your way to that ending, something that writing I continue to deal with now as a writer for the Des Moines Register. I've been really fortunate enough to write about wrestling at all levels for the last decades. First for the Daily Iowan, then for various internships at the Baltimore Sun and the Kansas City Star, and then at the Ames Tribune for a year, and now for the last few years at the Register here in Des Moines. And just being a part of the wrestling community again and getting to see, the wrestlers and the coaches and just to be able to embed myself in the community again and to see up close how much people truly love it, more than I ever thought possible, that really reignited my love for the sport again. You get to share these stories about these wrestlers, about these coaches, about the community, and about what it all means to them and what they're really doing it for. You get to see the process up close, and you get to really appreciate the discipline required. You get to see and really become enthralled by their matches when you really get to know these people. In a word, you become obsessed, right? And it's easy to sit back and watch a match and just love the movements and the attack and reattack and, to really sit back and enjoy the technique of the whole thing. But it was really those stories that really brought me back to the sport. And I've been fortunate enough to write about a lot of really cool wrestlers and really cool stories during my time, during my professional writing life, right? It's really easy to kind of lean on, the fact that, I've written about a lot of champions, right? State champions, national champions, world and Olympic champions. And those stories always super cool, right? The obstacles they got to navigate, the hurdles they got to clear, the moves they have to execute, at the right time in order to win that big match. But to be honest, a lot of the stories that stick with me are about those larger-than-life lessons, about, it's not about always winning matches, and it's not always about bringing home medals, and, it's about believing in yourself and understanding the value of hard work and knowing that if you do the little things consistently, day after day, and stack them up, eventually big things will happen, right? I think about stories like Cam Kruger. He's a coach's son from Denver, Iowa, who was born blind, but he found a lot of confidence on the wrestling mat. I think about stories like Cale Winter from nearby Waukee. He spent a month in the ICU with blood clots in his lungs, and a few months later, he took 5th at the state wrestling tournament. I think about, these kids like Lucas Rowland from nearby PCM. He was PCM's first ever state wrestling champ not too long ago, and he did it all while his mom was battling cancer. I think about, a wrestler, Lily Luft. Maybe some of you have heard of her. She lost her older brother to an ATV accident and decided to give wrestling a try because that was a sport he loved. And now she's made it her own. She's a 2-time state champion. She's an All-American, and she's going to go wrestle in college next year. I think about kids like Quincy Happel. And that name might sound familiar too, because Quincy is the 3rd brother from the famed Happel family out of Lisbon, Iowa, right? And he grew up hearing, about how his dad, Dean, won 3 state titles and how both of his older brothers each won 4, right? Can you imagine the expectations? Well, Quincy had his own spectacular career, right? He won 180 matches. He qualified for state all 4 years that he was in high school. But he didn't finish on the podium. He didn't get a state medal, that elusive state medal, until his senior year. He came close. He always came 1 match shy, something we like to call the blood round, right? You win and you're on the podium, you lose and you're not, right? He always got to that match, but there was 1 year where he lost after he scored the first points, and there was another match that he lost to a heated rival, right? But finally, his senior year, Quincy won in the quarterfinals, and if you do that, you advance to the semifinals, and that guarantees a top 6 finish, right? State medalist, finally. That poor kid looked up to the ceiling at Wells Fargo Arena and let out a big exhale, and as he walked off the mat, his dad wrapped him in a hug and said, "Welcome to Saturday, bud." It's those kinds of stories that stick with me. Written about large-scale efforts, right? Wrestling's been going through a lot the last few years and really over the last couple of decades, right? The rise of girls and women's wrestling, not just here in Iowa, but all around the country. And, when I was in college, I was fortunate to write about the Save Olympic Wrestling movement because they almost eliminated that sport from the Olympic Games, right? Can you imagine the original form of competition not being in the Olympic Games? That's crazy. But what really sticks out about those specific stories is that these people are fighting not just for the opportunity to, win big matches and bring home medals, but they're fighting for the opportunity for others to experience wrestling and all of the great things that it has to offer. You know, through my own story and through my own obsession, I've learned that the sport of wrestling, you know, you're not always going to get exactly what you want at the time that you think you're going to get it. You know, sometimes when you put in the hard work now, you may not see the results until months, years, even decades down the line. But that's kind of the beautiful part about sports and wrestling, right? That you put in the work now, and sometimes it pays off way later, and you got to be ready for that opportunity when it finally opens up. You know, oftentimes we think, you know, we see a journey or we see a goal, and it becomes a little bit overwhelming because it seems so far away and it seems so big and lofty. But one thing wrestling taught me was just be where your feet are and focus on the next thing in front of you. And if you do that day after day, eventually you're going to get to where you want to be. Wrestling taught me that you're not always going to get exactly what you want, and you're not always going to maybe appreciate the hard work that you've put in. But eventually, if you stretch your boundaries a little bit, you'll find that you don't really have any boundaries at all. And that if you only measure your accomplishments by what you've achieved or the hardware that you brought home, then you'll never actually know how much you've grown. Thank you.
What if I told you you could have everything that you ever wanted in this life, but you'd have to sacrifice a piece of yourself to go and get it? Would you still go for it? It's cold outside. You know, a typical January in the city of Des Moines, Iowa, it's a Saturday in the year 2019. The wind chill made it about 26 degrees colder than it should be, needed to be, or any of us wanted it to be. And there was a slight layer of snow that sat on the ground, but nothing to really, bat an eye over. They for sure weren't canceling school type snow. There was a snow plow that passed me on my left as I made my way westbound towards Woolies. And you see, typically I'd be going to Woolies to bar back or occasionally bartend if the opportunity presented itself. But tonight was a little different. Tonight I was walking into a sold-out show. I was going to get to perform with the show that I had helped to orchestrate and put on at that, a show that would change my life forever, Culture Con, which was a standpoint in the city that showed what collaborative efforts could do when you come together for something better. As I walked in, I could feel the electricity immediately. It was packed shoulder to shoulder with friends, fans, family members, all moving around in this maze that was now the venue. We had a market set up towards the back that was showcasing art. We had food and a couple other attractions. To my right, there was a barber giving out haircuts to some of the performers that would be on stage. We had live art and a few other attractions over there as well. I shook up with a few familiar faces as I made my way to get backstage. I had never seen Woolies this full before, ever. And I got my ass whooped plenty of times being a bar back, plenty of times. You know, them country shows is a little crazy. They be drinking that Busch Light. And as I got backstage, I noticed that it was no less packed back there as well. A bunch of the artists had their friends and family back there, so I couldn't get to the green room and, relax like I typically would before my performance, but, who cares? I had to perform at a very high level at that. You see, I had practiced with my band members for weeks on end leading up to the event. I brought videographers and photographers to every single one of those rehearsals to help document and then put on social medias to draw attraction to it. I sold over 250 tickets individually to ensure success, and I knew every one of those songs like the back of my hand. Boy, I was ready, I promise. But something was missing. There was a massive hole. One that was not going to be filled by the success, by the crowd noise, by any of that money that I was sure to receive afterwards. You see, I was heartbroken. 3 weeks prior to that event, the love of my life and I at the time decided to head our separate ways. We had spent 4+ years together building memories, laughs, love, a friendship, all while simultaneously kind of growing our own separate ways as well. I think I was reluctant to read the writing on the wall. I knew that it was coming to an end, but I chose ignorance as opposed to acceptance, and I didn't want to accept the fact that it was going to be done. And eventually it did. But that was okay, because I thought I had it all, and I did have it all. You see, I lived in a house full of creatives in Sherman Hills on 16th and Woodland, about 2 blocks that way. And we built a studio in that house that we recorded in daily. My love even lived with me for a majority of that time, and I think we still might be in that house if it wasn't for the fact that our landlord lived right next door because it was a duplex, and he started to wonder why we were running a halfway house for creatives. So it didn't really work out the best. And that was all right. You see, me and her came from 2 different worlds. She was born into war-torn Bosnia in the early 90s, and I had a fairly simple life growing up in Des Moines. She moved with her family from Bosnia to Germany and from Germany to the US by the age of 7. And the biggest move that I had had was from here in Des Moines to Las Vegas in the 7th grade. You know, her values were kind of based within her family and moving as a unit and staying secure as one. And that's not to say that mine wasn't, it was just kind of different. You see, I watched my mother bust her ass for my entire life. She spent 35 years working for the American Red Cross, moving up and showing that she was not only a suitable candidate for a male-dominated position, but also a force to be reckoned with and brought value to this company. She made a sacrifice. She dedicated that time, but she was gone a lot. You see, I remember her being gone for days, if not weeks at a time, and when she was home, it was cool. You know, we went out to eat, which is still one of my favorite pastimes, you know. You know, as long as somebody else paying. But we would meander around the neighborhood, and, you know, we'd even watch Law & Order SVU, you know, that typical family bonding in the early 2000s. But I watched her make an enormous sacrifice, right? She dove into her career to change the entire trajectory of her family, and not only that, to prove to herself that she was capable, beyond capable of doing this work. And that was okay. You see, there was nothing that I missed. I didn't miss a meal. There wasn't a pair of shoes or a jersey that I didn't have sitting under that tree come Christmas time. And man, our family vacations, when I tell you about those, no, I'm just playing. They were actually my mom's work trips, but she turned them out. They was all right. But I came to realize something. I knew she wanted to be at every one of my taekwondo events, every football and basketball game. I knew she wanted to be at all the band recitals, and even the parent-teacher conferences to have them tell them that I was talking too much. But sometimes she couldn't be, and that's not because she didn't want to. It's because physics don't allow you to be in 2 places at one time. I know Elon Musk and Kanye are working on it, but they haven't got there yet. But you see, I noticed something. At a pretty young age about myself, I had this burning desire to learn more, this intrigue to see what I hadn't yet, to discover and figure out just more and more and more and more, an obsession, some might say. But I couldn't figure out what it was. I didn't know what I was obsessed with, honestly. I didn't know if it was money, power, job, status, women, good, bad, evil, ugly, what it was. I just knew I needed something. I knew I needed to prove something, and to some capacity, I still do. You see, growing up mixed brought about its own challenges, right? My mother is white and my father is black, which created this little mixed kid wandering around Des Moines trying to find his placement, find his group that he was supposed to identify with. I have a lyric in one of my songs off of my West album that reads, "I was too dark for the whites and not black enough for my race," which simply encompasses how I felt for a majority of my life. You see, unless I walked into every room introducing myself as a mixed kid, I knew what I looked like. To the blind eye, it was pretty typical. It was a black man in America at that. And to so many, that's still seen as a threat. I knew the chances, the opportunities in this microscope that I was under was significantly different than some of my counterparts. I knew that same grace, understanding, forgiveness, and overall privilege that was extended to white America typically was not given to me that often, to us that often. So I studied different. I drove my car different. I was in relationships different. I excelled and even thrived different because I knew that I had to. You see, I studied the dynamic of this country at a pretty early age. I started to piece the dominoes and all these effects that started falling into place. And I started to understand what was going on. This mechanism that was American capitalism was going to survive, thrive, separate, and dominate by any means necessary. Therefore, when any entity, individual, or group of people try to come together to, pull back that veil or erase that makeup that is America, at some points, in some capacity, they're taken care of. They're hushed. I think it's ironic. A lot of my idols, from Martin Luther King Jr. to Huey P. Newton, to Medgar Evers and Bungie Carter, to Fred Hampton, to Malcolm X, to Bob Marley, to Tupac Shakur, to Christopher Wallace, and the late, great Nipsey Hussle have all been silenced. And for what? Because they became too powerful? They spoke their truth too often. They united too many people to combat these evils that existed. You see, I think that's where my obsession truly lies, was with this want to understand why. Why did this happen, and why would this keep happening? You see, I think it's ironic, in 2020 during COVID, when people weren't allowed to go to their favorite bars, restaurants, Walmarts, and Walgreens, people damn near lost their minds. They posted it was an outrage, that their freedoms were being purged, their First Amendment right was in question, that they would not be told what they could and could not do because we live in America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, right? But imagine for a second not being able to participate in a country that you built from the ground up. Imagine walking into a bank and not being able to get a business loan to start that dream job that you've always wanted, or even build that house because that particular firm or branch doesn't loan to colored people. Imagine what you might do with 256 years of free labor, slave labor. What kind of greed and wealth and status do you think you might have? Imagine reading whites only or coloreds in the back, or better yet, blacks not allowed for a majority of your life or all of your life growing up in the South. What do you think that'd do to you? To your spirit, to your heart, to your conscious mind, to your attitude, to your lineage, to your heritage, to your culture, and to your people? Do you think it would hinder it? Maybe hurt it, damage it a little bit, create this chip on your shoulder, this want and this demand for more, an obsession maybe? You see, I know I can't have it all. I know I can't be it all to every single person, but I will live out my truth. I will live out my mission by any means necessary. I'll succeed, I'll thrive, and I'll dominate because I have to. For those that came before me and sacrificed, to every one of my brothers and sisters who is with me now, and to every single person that's sure to soon follow. I have a responsibility. And you know, no accolades going to tell me that I made it. No trophy sitting on my mantel case will tell me to slow down. And no amount of money that I've raised and or sitting in my bank account will tell me you've done it. And I think that's okay. Because, you know, you remember that cold Saturday night in 2019? I've become a lot more obsessed since that night. I recognize my mission, my obsession, and my vision. I sold out that same venue that we call Woolies 5 more times. I was named the Outstanding Young Iowan in 2020. I was named the recent Humanitarian Award winner by my alma mater, Simpson College. I was named the Volunteer of the Year and Friend of Education by the Des Moines Public School Systems in 2020. I was named to the Des Moines Register's 2021 People to Watch. I performed on the steps of the Capitol with the Des Moines Symphony for Yankee Doodle Pops in front of thousands of people after being commissioned to make a piece as to what freedom truly meant to me. So I wrote it from the perspective of a young black man in 1865 who just realized through the Emancipation Proclamation that he was now a free man in a country that never wanted him to begin with. I helped to organize and rally up the troops in protest in the city of Des Moines during COVID in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd. Along with my beautiful friends and my teammates, we started a nonprofit organization in 2020 by the name of the b.well Foundation. We've raised $300,000 since its inception and given it all back to the Des Moines Public School System to help provide not only resources and mentorship, but help level this playing field in these socioeconomic despair neighborhoods that exist. And if you're unfamiliar with what I'm talking about, I suggest you hop in your car tomorrow morning and drive by North High School. And then hop in that same car and drive on 235 and get out to West Des Moines, go see where Waukee plays, go see where Valley plays their high school football, and then shoot me a message and tell me what the difference is that you saw. I was named to the Des Moines Business Records 40 Under 40 and a list of other accolades that I will not mention because it's unnecessary. But I do understand one thing, that one slip up, screw up, F up, and it's all gone because I'm playing under different rules. So I'm obsessed with the details and the focus and all of the little things that nobody cares to see, has to see, or even wants to see. And that's okay. I've realized that. And I know that relationships are important. That same girl that I spoke on changed my life forever. And there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about her. But I understand that I can't juggle it all right now because I had to make a decision just like my mother did, to fight for something that was so much bigger than myself. So there is no money, there is no power, seen or unseen, or any individual that will have me sacrifice my dignity, my integrity, or my obsession with betterment. So from here on out, I will continue to become more, do more, and be more. Because I am obsessed, and I think it's okay. Thank you, Des Moines.